There is no minimalist rule book. Well, until now. The minimalists have created 16 rules for living with less, a free ebook which you can download right now at theminimalists.com/resources. Enjoy.
We got a question from Tall Poppy. What event or person most shaped your relationship to money?
That's a great question.
For me personally, I mean, there's no question it was. Well, I actually have two people. Dave Ramsey with respect to debt, and he, just his simple money advice, which works for anyone, whether you're making $20,000 a year or if you were like me making $200,000 a year, but I was still broke. He has some very simple advice that isn't easy advice. You actually have to put in work to pay off debt. You have to live very differently if you want to get out of debt. So that shaped me quite a bit. Also, our friend and my mentor, Carl Widener, who is, Ryan and I both worked with him back in our telecom days, and he once told me, don't ask a man who makes $20,000 a year how to make $100,000 a year.
Yeah. Josh, I got to say it was you, brother. You were the one who really helped me shape. I mean, you and Dave Ramsey, or I guess maybe Dave Ramsey through you is what really helped me. But I remember us having a conversation where on the whiteboard, you just helped label out exactly, where the money's coming in and where it should be going out. And yeah, I'm really grateful that you sat down and had that conversation with me, because I've been following that for the last, 8-9 years. And it's really helped me to not have so much stress around money. What about you, Chris? Who's influenced you the most?
Yeah, I was going to say my dad, I think. I was actually trying to think about it for a while. I was like, who is it? But probably my dad. And I don't think he ever said, Chris, here's some money lessons. It was just kind of by, following along. I was thinking of some examples. So I actually lived apart from him for about 3 years. From the time I was like 6, 7, and 8, I was in the Philippines with my mom and stepdad. And so my dad was back in the States, and he would write letters. I mean, this is like how it worked back then. You write letters, and he would send me an allowance of $1 a week. And at some point, I got this idea to ask you. I was like, Dad, what if you sent $2 and I used that extra dollar to buy something? I forgot how I phrased it, but it was like buy something for you or something like that. And he was like, that's a good idea. And he started sending $2, but I don't know if I ever actually bought anything for him. So maybe that was like an early entrepreneurial, venture. But the story I was thinking about was, so when I was actually back, in the States with him, remember this example. I think he just threw this out offhand, but it still remains with me. He was actually pretty poor for a while, and child support for me and all kinds of stuff. And, our big night out would be to go to Burger King. And he was telling me he had this car that kept breaking down, all the time. It was like an old van, actually, an old van that kept breaking down. And he said some of the guys at his work basically had told him, they're like, we ran the numbers and it would actually be more affordable for you to buy a Mercedes in the long term, because of the maintenance. They had this, they were engineers, they were into this whole thing, so it's better for you to buy a Mercedes than to have this old van that keeps breaking down. And he said, his response is that's great, but there's a problem, there's a small problem with that, which is I can't buy a Mercedes, right now. And so I think of that in the no debt context. It's like what we were talking earlier about a mortgage, and some people say that, this is a good debt to have because, this reason, but is it really? So my dad never bought a Mercedes, and I thought about that a lot. It's like, just because something might make sense for somebody else, or it makes sense on some theoretical model, is not necessarily how it applies in the real world. And so you have to think about how it applies to your situation.
Right, because those models don't take in consideration the sort of mental costs of a lot of these things as well. There's a particular weight that's involved with having a car payment or a mortgage payment, and it's not that I'm diametrically opposed to having a mortgage. It's just that I'm opposed to having that debt if I could otherwise pay it off. If I had a $200,000 mortgage, but I had $200,000 cash in the bank, I'd rather put that money toward the mortgage and thus not have that debt and have all the associated costs, the weight of that debt. Hey, I was just talking to our mutual friend, Julian Smith, yesterday.
Yeah, I've known him for a long time.
Julian,
I haven't talked to him
don't
recently,
you?
but I knew him for probably the same time I've known you guys, 10 years.
Yeah, he's up at, he's the CEO of a company called Breather now, but he's the author of quite a few books, most notably a book called The Flinch. And we were just talking yesterday. He was asking how things are going out here, and I was asking him how things are going up in Montreal. And I said, in a weird way, it feels like I've spent the last 12 years preparing for this pandemic without even knowing it. And he said, I think you have. He goes, your cost of living is relatively low, isn't it? And I said, yeah, my only expenses right now are food, rent, and utilities. And he goes, oh, you don't even have a car. I said, oh, no, I have a car. I just don't have a car payment. And it's funny that we often we mistake one for the other, right? It's like you should be able to have a car without having a car payment. If we have a car payment, we're doing it wrong. And so in a weird way, Ryan and I have spent the last decade making sure that our expenses are relatively low on the personal side. I mean, obviously our business has expenses. We employ quite a few people. But on the personal side, trying to keep that as low as possible so that in a time like this where things have to tighten up or we may even have to dip into our emergency fund because of a true emergency that's going on, it gives me a cushion to not feel anxious and wonder like, oh my gosh, am I going to be able to pay rent this month? Well, 10 years ago, that would have been a big worry of mine. And now it's less of a worry because I've spent the last decade sort of preparing for something like this.